Can you remember someone that was a great teacher in your life? Someone that really inspired you to learn or to improve your life? As we go through life, we certainly have many different kinds of teachers in our lives. We may have teachers at home, through our family. We, of course, have teachers in the classroom that may inspire us through their passion for the subjects that they've decided to teach. We may have mentors that really shape us to accomplish more in life or to develop more of a character to be more like Christ. Great teachers are passionate, they're inspiring, they really have a love for the subject matter. They like to bring learning to life and relate it to the lives of those that they're trying to help. I'm sure most of us would obviously consider Christ to be a great teacher, one that was certainly instrumental in each of our lives. Although he's a teacher that we've never met face to face, although we've certainly had a relationship with him. And Christ had various teaching methods that he used. He used stories, or he may have used, in a lot of cases, he used hyperbole to be able to get people's attention, to really kind of shock them to pay attention to what he had to say. He would use memorable sayings, and he would ask a lot of questions. But there's another method that he used that I found especially interesting recently, and that it may seem a little counterintuitive as far as being a good way of teaching things, but he would oftentimes confuse people by his responses and confuse them by what he would tell them and what he would say. They're like Christ's confusing conversations, is kind of what I've kind of dubbed it. And there's a pattern to these that I want to go through today and show you with a few examples. So I have a visual aid to be able to help us understand this structure and to kind of see it. And I have two very familiar stories that we're going to go through that show this particular pattern in the conversations that he would have. So it would start out with the person saying something to Christ. Then Christ would answer in a way that was hard for them to understand. Okay? The person would then respond, or they would misunderstand that response by Christ. And so what did Christ do? He answered in a way that was even more difficult to understand by that individual. And then after that, there'd follow a discourse, a lesson, and an explanation for them, and of course, for all of us. So let's take a look at two examples of this. The first one is in John chapter 3. This is the story of Christ and Nicodemus. And it starts out with the inquirer saying something. In this case, Nicodemus says, "Rabbi," in John 3, verse 2, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." So how does Jesus answer? Jesus answered and said to him, "Most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." Nicodemus is probably like, "I don't really know what you're talking about there, but okay." So he comes back and says, "How can a man be born when he is old? How can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born?" So obviously he's misunderstanding what Christ is saying here. So how does Jesus respond in a way that's even more difficult for him to understand? He says in verse 5, "I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I said to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear the sound of it, but cannot tell where it comes from and where it goes. So is everyone who is born of the Spirit." And Nicodemus says to him, "How can these things be?" He doesn't understand what Christ is saying, but Christ is trying to give him certainly a very important lesson for him and for all of us as it's been recorded. All right, Let's look at our second example. This is going to be in John 4, just one chapter over. Again, a fairly familiar example of the Samaritan woman at the well. So the woman, after Christ has asked her for a drink of water from the well, she asks, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" Of course, this was something culturally that was not really done. So how did Jesus answer her? In verse 10 of John 4, he said, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Okay, it's probably not exactly what she thought she was going to get the answer. So that, again, she's kind of misunderstanding what he's saying, and she says, "Sir, I have nothing to draw. You have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" So she's still thinking, obviously, in a very physical way of the water in the well right there. She's misunderstanding what Christ is trying to tell her. So how does he respond? It's in a way that's even maybe more difficult to understand. It says, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst." So she's, again, probably still thinking about it in a physical context. And he's saying, like, well, if you take my water, you're never going to be thirsty again, right? He continues, "But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw." And I think it's kind of obvious that maybe she still's not quite getting it, because she's still thinking she doesn't want to have to come and keep getting water from the well. Again, there's a whole lot we could go into with this story, but we'll just leave it from there. And then Christ goes on to kind of explain things more to her. So these two stories are an example of how Christ went back and forth with people in a way that may seem a little counterintuitive as a teaching method, in that he's kind of digging them in a little bit and not trying to confuse them, but he was confusing them because of their limited understanding. So why would he do this? Why would Christ respond this way? Well, we can see that through this and through the discourse that they end up having, that the people start working things out somewhat for themselves. You can see the wheels turning, that they're trying to get that understanding. We can see that in their limited human interpretation of what Jesus says, they're not really thinking about it in a spiritual way as much. And we can see certainly that we need God to fully understand the gospel, and that we're going to need his help to be able to really understand his message. Thankfully, we have been called. We have had our minds open so that we're able to better understand these kinds of lessons that are recorded for us. I'm grateful for that, and I hope you are too. But I certainly think that I can be guilty of understanding the complete picture of what someone may be trying to tell me before I respond or before I make a comment. This is kind of what after reading all this, it kind of made me think about how does it apply to my life and how I relate to other people. Because it seems like, our culture today certainly promotes that everyone must have an opinion and that everyone has to take a side on everything. We certainly see it on TV, on the internet, in advertising, and remarkably, I think, especially in the last several years, even companies who have been sometimes very much in the middle of not taking a stance on things have decided that even they need to take a stance and have an opinion about what's happening in our culture. And it's certainly easy to voice our opinion nowadays to an audience of thousands. And you could certainly spend a lifetime listening to everyone's opinions on every single subject imaginable. Oh, they were supposed to cut that. Oh, there we go. So, do we have to have an answer for everything? There's certainly nothing wrong with having an opinion or knowing a thing or two. But do we have to have an immediate answer for everything? Or can we get into trouble by being too quick to respond to someone without fully understanding the issue? Now, of course, the examples we read in the Bible, they weren't really getting into trouble, but you can see how their quick response to things kind of led them in a way that was confusing and making it confusing to them. We don't want to fall into that trap. And so I want to leave you with some wisdom from the Bible on this subject that hopefully you can think about this week. So I have 4 verses that I want to take a look at real quick. The first one's in James 1 and verse 19. There's a lot in this very short verse that we can learn, and there's a lot that we can remember and probably can easily forget if we don't keep it in the forefront of our mind. And it says in James 1, verse 19, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. If we have an immediate and possibly an uninformed answer to someone or a comment, we certainly can run the risk of sounding like a fool or missing the point that they're trying to make entirely. Proverbs 12 and verse 15 tells us that fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to others. I really like how the Amplified Bible states Proverbs 12 and verse 23. It says, a shrewd man is reluctant to display his knowledge until the proper time, but the heart of the overconfident fool proclaims foolishness. So finding the proper time to say something and not allowing our overconfidence or our pride to get in the way of what we're saying is certainly an important thing to remember. And finally, the New Living Translation puts Romans 12 and verse 16 in this way. It says, live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people. And don't think you know it all. So let's study and remember these 4 verses to help us strengthen our conversations and our relationships with others.